Serious, students who were taught by a teacher that turned out to be a criminal. What were they like when they taught you? The principal of my high school was caught embezzling money from the school. She was a nice person and developed the school in many positive ways. It was a screwed up situation in which her husband had cancer and they couldn't afford the bills. Also, a rabbi from my elementary school was arrested for something pedophilia related, not sure if PRN or molestation. He was creepy and invited all the kids to sit on his lap. People were fine with this until they weren't. Years after I graduated, I saw my old high school Spanish teacher in the paper for buying pills. Was not really surprised as she was out for over 2 years from a severe back injury during a car accident. Pill addictions are no joke and happen to all types of people. My gym teacher seemed like a normal gym teacher. That is, a little odd and wore shorts that seemed almost indecently short. Well, the year after I graduated, he gets busted for child PRN. Not just looking at child PRN. He was creating child PRN. I don't think they found anything taken in the high school itself. But there were former students of his in there. He ended up killing himself in his jail cell while awaiting trial. His wife worked at the school as a literature teacher but was forced to leave by the PTA. That bothers me just because she wasn't involved and was actually a really good teacher. High school geometry teacher. Young guy in his late 20s. Didn't understand the material himself. Had no patience for teenagers. Got arrested for giving a student coke and taking him across state lines. There was a teacher at my middle school who was weird. Not outright creepy. But just really strange mannerisms. He spoke in a strangely high-pitched voice, not in an effeminate manner. Just weirdly high. And called students things like chitlins and dolls. I was never in his class. But saw him every now and then. One time he caught a friend and I chatting at the water fountain when we should have been in class. He took us back to our teacher and told her he caught us having a tea party at the water fountain. Weird guy. But not really sinister seeming. Anyway. It came out a couple years later that he was a pedophile and child pornographer. As far as I know, he was never convicted of actually touching a minor. He would apparently invite 12-13-year-old male students over to his house for tutoring, with their parents' permission. Then unexpectedly have to leave for a half hour or so. He would leave pornography out where the kids would easily find it. And had hidden cameras set up to videotape them when they inevitably did what 12-13-year-old males do when they are alone and discover pornography. Creepy FK. My 6th grade gifted teacher got arrested for stealing all the color Mac computers in the Mac lab of the high school. After he slept with a student and got her pregnant. He was creepy. My teacher when I was 10-11 was actually a great teacher. All the mums loved him and he taught us kids a lot and prepared us for secondary school. He was the one who got me interested in amateur dramatics. Cue about 9 years later. The morning paper has just dropped through the letterbox. I unfold it and he's staring back at me. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison for having an adult relationship with an 11-year-old girl. He also took her on holiday and paraded her in front of other pedophiles. Sickening. There was a math teacher at my high school who had a typical alpha male personality. He liked to stand with his nose in the air and look down at everyone as they entered his class study hall. Spoke boisterously to assert his dominance. And often would say such things as, "Are we going to have a problem here? Excuse me. Do I need to intervene?" etc. Turns out, he liked to download kid PRN on the school provided computer. And was promptly fired. It was so satisfying. Edit. Spelling. My 7th grade science teacher had been molesting the girls for a decade before he was caught. He tried to flee the country back into Croatia when he found out people were onto him. The really sad thing was that I got along well with him and really liked his teaching style and how he ran his class. Before I found out the horrors that he committed behind closed doors, I actually considered him to be one of my favorite teachers. That's how those that abuse get away with it for so long. They compartmentalize. It's all part of the grooming. You don't just groom victims. You grew a community. I had an awesome math teacher in high school. Think Ace Ventura but before that movie came out. Alrighty then kids. Let's do some math. Dot. Then he'd do problems on the board and assign those same problems as homework. Good dude. Turns out he beat his wife till she divorced him and then molested his kids. My elementary school principal was busted stealing drugs out of the nurse's cabinet. Every morning he would get on the PA system and say once a task is just begun. Never leave it till it's done. Be the labor great or small. Do it well or not at all. I still quote this to this day. He also used to give paddlings. This was early 90s TX. My 9th grade social studies teacher got arrested for shooting heroin in the bathroom in between classes. One time she tried telling us that the Holocaust was made up and she's only telling us about it because they make her. Wasn't too happy when I told her my grandma was a survivor. Edit. My econ teacher in high school was beloved by the entire school. Hysterical. Vulgar, in a funny way. Understanding. Treated 17-year-olds like adults, which was a great feeling. The first for a lot of the kids in his class. And was a fantastic teacher with a great pass rate. He made learning about stagflation and the minute workings of the stock market into a fun activity that we actually looked forward to every day. He gets voted Teacher of the Year every 3 years or so and has been at the school for about a decade. He still teaches there. And no legal action has been brought against him. But it's an open secret that 3 freshman girls, 15 years old, have given him blowjobs in a nearby bathroom. I adored him when I was in his class. In my first year of secondary school, I was taught by 2 men who turned out to be pedophiles. One paid a girl, and the other possessed indecent images. They were both odd teachers but not that sort of odd. I liked them both and was surprised to find out what happened to them. And due to typical teenage humor, they both became the Osaboji men who was said to be hiding in that dark room or in the hole in the ceiling. The middle high school band teacher got arrested for child PRN while I was in 8th grade. I never imagined it was that bad. But I did quit band after the 1 required year because he was creepy. My 8th grade science teacher got arrested for producing child pornography with a 16-year-old girl from the high school in our district. He was always known as the cool, hip teacher that got along well with the cool, popular kids in my middle school. What we thought was hip teacher behavior turned out to be a creepy old man flirting with young middle school girls. I had a high school teacher who was basically a jerk all of the time and was massively self-confident to the extremes. I think he taught social studies but I never took his classes. Instead he was one of my assistant coaches alongside his brother. About 7-8 years after I graduated I learned from the local news that he got busted sleeping with a student who was currently going to my high school. Had sex in the football gym too. His brother lost his job as apparently they had sex at his house too. Though the brother didn't actually do anything with the girl. Last I heard he got probation and the sex offender list. His brother I do feel bad for because he was alright. Rumor has it his wife at the time was also a former student of his that he married shortly after she graduated. Apparently he must have figured he got away with it the first time so he went hunting again. 8th grade science teacher. Can't remember what he did but I saw his mugshot online a few years ago. This dude looks like the lead singer of Gene's Addiction but somehow more athletic and with crazier eyes. He had a high-pitched voice that made you want to die and the only thing he did was play documentaries on the apocalypse during class. Gotta love the NC education system. We had this substitute teacher who was perhaps the most extreme patriot I've ever met. I don't want to say he was racist per se. Because he was cool with Americans of all stripes. Just no one else. So every time he was there we'd get a lecture on how great America is, regardless of class. I had him for debate one day. And he was listening to and judging our cases. Well, it just so happened to be that I was debating on a topic about human rights for people accused of terrorism. And my case put Guantanamo in a negative light. Oh boy. Did I get a scolding. I nearly cried. Welp. Turns out there was one thing he liked more than America. Kids. Disgusting man got arrested on counts of child molestation dating back years. None were from our town or state for that matter. He subbed for high school and the charges were for very young kids in his hometown. I wasn't entirely surprised. I always felt deeply uncomfortable around him. It was a running joke, before the charges came out, about who got him that day. The teacher that taught my class sex ed in primary school was arrested last year for filming students undressing in the toilets after swimming lessons. He was a little weird. Was in the same class with his daughter and she was really quiet. I made an account just to tell this story but it'll probably get lost. Wasn't a teacher but a janitor at my middle school. He was always a little weird and off-putting and would yell at kids for talking too loud or being in the hallways during class. My one weird experience with him was when I was staying after school for a club and I went to use the bathroom. I walked in and he was in there cleaning the stalls, so I began to step out and I was doing so he told me I could still use the bathroom and he'd just be there cleaning. Of course that made me uncomfortable, so I left, but I never really told anyone about it. Years later my parents saw in the paper that the janitor of my middle school had gotten arrested for sexually molesting his own daughter, who was 6, and other girls at the school. It was in fact the same janitor. My 7th grade environmental science teacher got arrested for sexual harassment. Creep. Nobody was surprised. My old bus driver got arrested for sexual assault of a minor. Again. Nobody surprised. My former wrestling coach just got arrested for sexual imposition. OV. And battery. Gotta love public schools. The wrestling coach shocked me the most. He was a great guy and was my favorite coach. Outside of wrestling he also did a lot of work with the Special Olympics. He had 2 young children and a wife who he seemingly adored. He seemed like a good person and it's scary that people who seem normal, who are living amongst, are capable of things like this. When I was a sophomore in high school, I took an anatomy and physiology class at my local community college at night with an adjunct professor who was a retired dentist. He wasn't a great teacher by any means but did spend an awful lot of time during labs with the attractive and younger women in the class. He walked me to my car on more than one occasion. Maybe a third of the way through the semester I go to class and there awaits a counselor and the dean of students. Apparently our professor was fired after several girls in my class were approached by him for good grades in exchange for a whole list of different things. Turns out, he wasn't a retired dentist either. His license had been revoked and he had gone to jail for having molested several women while they were on nitrous oxide. It took forever to catch him at it apparently because most had no memory. Needless to say all those who remained in the class got an A. Everybody knew there's something a little off about my 10th grade algebra teacher. I wasn't a particular fan of his either. Because he always seemed to give me a hard time. I have fairly severe ADD. And at the time I was living unmedicated, for reasons I'd have to go on a tangent to explain. Needless to say, he'd single me out for a number of reasons. Like doing my work the wrong way. Even though I'd get the right answers. He never really seemed to care much about my academic progress. And didn't bother to help much. What I didn't notice at the time was that it was because I was a boy. He was also the girls' cross-country coach. He was fired and arrested for sexual assault. Good riddance, I say. My 11th grade anatomy teacher got arrested for child PRN on the school computers. He was super creepy and could not understand personal space or social boundaries. Not to mention he was unsanitary. While dissection he lifted the cat's intestines to show us some ligaments in the hips with his bare hands. He then proceeded to go clean his coffee mug without washing his hands. He was a sexist jerk who would mark down girls for cheating if they did better than all the boys in class, so wasn't even a little surprised to hear that he had been arrested for beating the shit out of his wife and child. I think he got 3 years. Not enough anyway. One of my favorite high school teachers turned out to have a computer full of CP. I don't know the details. Couldn't really bring myself to look up the articles. I only found out when I came back to visit my old teachers on a break from college and created an uncomfortable moment when I asked where he was. Never got any creepy vibes from him at all in the 3 years I was in his classes. For the most part he was just very soft spoken and gentle in personality. He was a really good teacher and supportive of all the students' projects. Wrote one of my recommendation letters for college. I have no idea if any of my old classmates got anything weird from him. But for me it was a total shock. My junior high school band teacher was arrested for statutory rape of a 17-year-old. 20 years after the act. He was a great teacher. Though. Manipulative. Self-serving. And shitty person. He was considered one of the cool teachers in high school. All the girls ogled his ass. He was young and good looking. They would gush about him even 5 years after graduation. A few years ago. An old classmate tags me on Facebook. He'd been arrested for some kind of SZUL messaging with one of his female students. Remember kids? If the teacher doesn't come across as an authoritative douche at least some of the time, there's probably something wrong. In my hometown the music department of a few schools sponsor a youth symphony that local high school kids can join and play in. One year they could not find a director, so one of the local middle high school band instructors stepped up to fill the role. About a quarter of the way through the year he brought in some random kid to play an instrument we needed in the symphony. The kid didn't really seem to have parents or a home and the director would often give him rides to and from rehearsal. None of the kids recognized him from any of the schools that the students attended. We had kids from 2 towns and 4 or 5 high schools. Everyone just had a weird feeling about it. Turns out, the band director liked touching kids. So, did he kidnap that kid? Older gay dude that was a perfect blend of quietly classy and colorfully fabulous. He taught a freshman general arts class that half the students at my college took because it was fun and easy. In this one class he taught us about architecture, art, ballet, furniture design, fashion design, foreign films, and more. Pretty much helped get the new freshmen exposed to culture. He was very cool as a teacher and everyone liked the class, but he never talked about himself or stuck around to talk to students. No one really knew much about him. I don't even remember his name. Anyways, he was fired abruptly after it was found out that he'd been molesting students in the men's locker room. Not sure if he's in jail or what happened. My middle school gym teacher, G, was one of the nicest guys a person could ever meet. He always wore a big smile and he always had a minute to talk when you needed to. Cut to 10 years later. I am walking down the street and I notice the local paper with the headline, "Teacher arrested for having sex with minors." And there was G's picture right below it. Turns out he had been having sex with 5 different 12-13-year-old girls on the volleyball team and one of them finally came forward to report him. His cellmate, Bubba, is probably the only one smiling now.